The SoulTaker is the product of Tatsunoko Pro, which you may know from things like Gatchaman, Yataman, Kashurn, Karas, and a number of other superheroes that are both very Western and very Japanese. While shows like Tekkaman Blade and Gatchaman did make it over here, albeit in a rather chopped-to-hell fashion, most of their releases that come stateside get a very limited distribution. Also, a lot of their relatively more recent shows are completely buttfuck crazy. Case in point, the SoulTaker. So the show starts up with Kyosuke Date getting stabbed by his mother. But he seems to be doing alright physically. I say physically because getting stabbed by anyone, least of all your mom, will leave some pretty extensive crazy in anyone's head. In Kyosuke's case, he's just kind of neurotic. But what he also earned in this is a companion named Shiro Mibu, who seems to have the skinny on basically everything in Kyosuke's life up to this point. There are two organizations, the hospital and the Kirihara Corporation, who are tracking down flickers, which are women who are formed from a shard of the soul of Kyosuke's sister Runa, who is missing. Okay, let me draw up a little diagram here for both your and my continued sanity. Kyosuke is searching for Runa, who threw off these creatures called flickers, who are being hunted by Kirihara, so they can find Runa and bring her back to the hospital, who is sending mutants after Kyosuke because he's searching for Runa. She doesn't do a terribly good job of explaining all this. It's a little bit convoluted in execution, which is strange because it's not exactly the most complicated plot on the planet. Oh, right, I suppose it would behoove me to mention that Kyosuke can turn into this demon thing called the SoulTaker. He spends a lot of time getting his butt kicked, which is kind of strange because he's supposed to be the most powerful mutant ever, I guess. A lot of his enemies, strangely enough, are males who are going after females, so he's stepping in to try and defeat all of these guys who are coming after pieces of his sister. You know, there's probably some symbolism there, but I don't think I want to get into it. Also, in his human form, he carries around an electromagnetic blade, which is... well, a lightsaber by any other name is still a lightsaber. But he fairly well forgets about that within a few episodes. It's also interesting to note that this show starts off in a Power Ranger-esque fashion, where the main character has to power up to take out the bad guy, but just chops through the little minions like no one's business. They drop this aspect after 3 episodes. I can't really get a beat on whether or not that was a good idea, because they killed it off faster than a father figure in a comic book. And speaking of father figures, the head of the hospital, Richard Vincent, is responsible for administering the drug Beta Applicon to all the important characters in the show and giving them these fantastic but screwy powers. They may as well call this drug Mutant Maker because that seems to be all it's good for. Kind of a strange thing for a drug to be able to do, create huge, super powerful mutants, but what do I know about biochemistry? So, 2 guesses of what the OMG huge plot twist is in the middle of this show. Not that it's of any real consequence in the story, it just further demonstrates that Kyosuke is apparently the center of the universe. So you may have noticed that this show has a very, very intense and strange look to it. And if you haven't, you need to switch tabs back into this window and take a look, damn it! You'll notice that a lot of the angles are very art house, and the use of shadow and contrasting colors is very effective and sets a mood that's appropriate for the story itself. This is something I feel doesn't happen a lot in recent anime because they want to make sure to nail the moe demographic or use all of the colors in their digital toolbox. And this show effectively captures the dark and brooding story with its art and really runs with it. There's a lot of strange pseudo-Christian imagery in this, especially with the relation of Kyosuke and his mother to Jesus and Mary, but I don't really know if it has anything to do with the story itself other than being weird and kind of disconcerting to Western audiences. It's not unlike putting a lot of Buddhist imagery into a Western production. It looks different, and for lack of a better word, foreign. Especially when you're moving to disconcert like this show is, that's good because it works on 2 angles. One for the original audience and one for the American audiences. Unfortunately, this story busts up their dark and brooding atmosphere with the insertion of Komugi, the little pink nurse mutant.
Why do I have to hang around with a straw-chomping deviant of an old fart?
I'm consistently amazed how unfailingly the Japanese seem to sabotage their own design. Whether it's putting something like a pink and fluffy character in a dark and brooding show, which will totally bust up the entire rhythm, or putting something painful, annoying, and completely unnecessary into a game, or just sacrificing quality for graphic power, they seem to do this consistently, almost like clockwork. And frankly, it's getting frustrating.
The worst part is that she's everywhere. She's one of those annoying characters who just pops up all over the place to be annoying and cute when the show really doesn't call for it. Now, I'm looking at this from the perspective that all the elements in the show should be forging towards one specific ending, and that everything should have a purpose to that end. Maybe that doesn't jive with some people, but that's how I see it. And so, to that end, fuck Komugi and fuck her stupid pink fuzzy spin-off. Well, now that I got that off my chest, this was directed by Akayuki Shinbo, which you may know from shows like Sayonara Zetsubo Sensei and Madoka Magica. You also might know him from this show, where I've ragged on his love for little girls. Yeah, he directed Petite Cosette, Moonphase, and Dance in the Vampire Bund. These are not shows that you accidentally fall into, folks. Certainly not with the same sort of concepts, like little girls victimizing grown men. However, he's still pretty damn good at the bizarre angles and imagery, and the use of color is pretty amazing. But I have to give him credit, he managed to restrain himself from putting any naked little girls in. Ah! God damn it, Shimbo! Friggin'. Well, ultimately, the show works on most of the levels it was shooting for. It wanted to do something dark and more adult-oriented, which worked. It wanted to have a twisted, bizarre look to it, which it got. The dub really doesn't have that much to be said about it, other than it sounds like a Gundam Wing reunion show, but it's perfectly functional. This was put out by Geneon, so good luck digging it up, but if you want to find it, it's not a bad little show to look up. After this show, I'm moving on to something that I can never seem to get away from in this witching month: vampires. However, before I get to Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, I'm hitting Black Blood Brothers. Wish me luck.